slightly mad. I'm going slightly mad.
Hello everybody. Hello Aloysius. How are you? You're very well. And you're very glad that we're here all by ourselves. I know. I'm very glad that we're here all by ourselves too. Boy, that last time taking liberties, wasn't it? Yes, anyway. So, have you got a question for me, Aloysius? Yes. Oh, good. But before we get to your question, we have our shop. Remember, we have our shop and we have our Redbubble shop where we have books and all sorts of pretty things on the Redbubble shop and writing services and all sorts of interesting writing related things in our shop. And that is how you support us. Also, it's really great if you give us a like or you subscribe. And that's everything, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so Aloysius, what's your question? I was wondering, yes, what are the writing books you would recommend that people read? Ooh, that's a really good question, Aloysius. And I just happen to have all the writing books that I would recommend sitting right here. I know, it's as if this was pre-planned, isn't it? Yes. So, first of all, I would recommend, obviously, our own book. Now, this is a book with a very specific purpose. This is a book designed to help you write that first draft of a novel. It has lots and lots of individual week lessons. Each week has a different lesson focusing on a different aspect of the narrative, but it's not a how to write. It's a how to write a novel, where to put your focus, how to arrange your time, things like that. Okay? Yes. Okay. So that's a start. It's probably not, if I'd never written anything at all and never read anything at all, I wouldn't start with this. It's more, you might have been doing a bit of writing, been finding yourself, you've read a few things, but you really want an idea of where you actually start. This one's a good one for that. So there you go. Now, the books that we're having a look at are going to be split in between, if you are, depending on the kind of writer you are, so whether you are a genre writer, like you, or whether you are a literary fiction writer, like me. Now, I use both of these sets of books because just because I don't write genre fiction doesn't mean that books that are more applicable to a genre fiction writer are not going to be of any use to me. No, because good advice is good advice. And to start out with, this novel, How Not to Write a Novel. Genre fiction can get incredibly tropey. And this is a book that helps writers to basically avoid the very, very common tropes that unpublishable manuscripts will show, that you will see in them. So there's a lot of different elements in this. It goes through all sorts of elements of how to write a novel, through showing you how not to do it. So it gives you negative advice. And then it goes and tells you, if you want to avoid this, do this, 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 and this. It's quite a fun little book. This is, I would say, a beginner's book. Especially if you are a person who's written a lot of fanfic and you want to work out how do I get out of fanfic and into regular fiction, because fanfiction has a tendency to be full of a lot of the things that will stop your writing being published. And so knowing that, this thing that I've fallen into because it's a trope in fanfic will not work in regular fiction. So that one's a really good novel. Really good book for helping write your novel. Okay, this one, Mine is an older copy. This is still in print. This one is actually an Australian book. It is A Passion for Narrative, a guide for writing fiction. I like this one. This one is very readable. It is, again, working its way through from a beginner sort of level of writing. And moving through a lot of different elements and using a lot of examples. This one actually uses a lot of examples from Australia, from mostly Australian, some Canadian novels, so less American examples. So if you're not an American, this might be useful because a lot of, especially Australian fiction, has its own sets of requirements in terms of this is what an Australian novel sounds like. So this is helpful because a lot of writing books have a very Anglo-American focus, and that's not how you write an Australian novel, for instance. So this one's quite an interesting one. Okay. Our fourth book is an old one. This one is called Becoming a Writer, Dorothea Brande. I'm not sure how it's going with the light. This one is less about practical things around becoming a writer and more about the way of getting into the mental space that you need to write. So it's all about getting into flow. It was written in the 1930s and it is very useful. A little bit odd, very useful for anyone writing, I would say. Now, the next book that I have that's very general, very usable by any audience, genre fiction or otherwise, is The Making of a Story by Alice LaPlante. This is a Norton guide to creative writing. It is really big. It has complete short stories published in it because she'll talk about something, deconstruct something, and have the complete short story at the end of each chapter so that you can see how it works in situ. It's a fascinating book. Really, this one is this is the best beginner's handbook. Like, once I'd gone through this, I had to go and enroll in a master's to move beyond this. This one is really good. It won't get you, as I said, I enrolled in a master's to get higher than this. So it won't take you into really literary fiction as a literary fiction writer, but it is really solid. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend this. She has many, many years of teaching creative writing experience at what university? Stanford University in the US. This one obviously is very US based, but really, really solid book, especially if you are looking for like a one-stop shop. I'd go with this. Big book though. It's not cheap. All right. The only book that I have by a celebrity writer, because I don't actually like celebrity writers writing guides terribly much. No. You don't? No. Not even Stephen? No. Basically because they have a tendency to, they're not teachers. Okay? That's a big thing. And it doesn't really matter who they are. Part of being a teacher is recognizing this works for me, but it may not work for you. And therefore I have multiple strategies so that my students can learn. Even if a strategy doesn't work for me, it may work for my student. Celebrity writers have a tendency to be a bit more this worked for me, so it must work for you, which I don't like. You're not going to write like Stephen King or Neil Gaiman by following their writing routine. It's just not. I mean, it might be fun to try, but you're not going to be that. They're not, like, this one is very much not the nuts and bolts of it, unlike everything else we've had a look at. So there's that. This is a lot more, there's a lot more memoiriness in it. It is I really enjoyed this book, but at the same time, I did not find it as useful as the more technical books on this list. So that is sort of my thoughts about celebrity writers writing manuals. Just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean you can teach it. Teaching and doing are two different skill sets. I know, because when I'm stuck teaching all the time, I go completely and utterly insane because I can't do any doing. So they don't utilize the same skill sets. So I really do question the use of the celebrity name sells copies, but I do question the use of them. I don't necessarily see them as worth your while. I found this interesting. It was interesting to see what her craft was like, but it wasn't something I was leaning on while learning to write. Okay, so yes, is that all the genre stuff? Yes, that is all the very, very genre stuff, and we're going to move on to the more literary fiction end of things. Now, that doesn't mean that these are not useful to you, but as I said, the yellow book got me up to a point where I could do a master's degree. These are the kinds of books that I used in my master's degree, so they do require a certain level of technical skill for these books to actually have use for you as a writer. Otherwise, they will feel just a little too overwhelming. So bear that in mind. The first one, this again is another Australian one. It is called The Writing Experiment, Strategies for Innovative Creative Writing by Hazel Smith. This one is looking at ways in which you can really shake up your writing, different things that you can do with your writing, experimental forms of writing. It's not really a how-to guide, it's just it's more of a book to push your imagination. There are writing exercises in this, which is always good if you're a writing exercise person. I am not. I get bored. But I use this in the same way that I would use a book like Ulysses or Tristram Shandy. Oh, there's a neat trick. I wonder how long that could be sustained for. So that's how I see that book. I like it, but it is more difficult to use. If you are, now these are not, I'm going to be appalling now and have to reorganize books. If you are having a look at something that is pushing beyond, but not necessarily explaining, I have 3 of these Cambridge Companions. You know from the Shakespeare book video that we did looking at Shakespeare books, how fond I am of the Cambridge Companions. And I have Introduction to Narrative, Creative Writing, and Narrative. Now, these are most definitely academic texts. They're written from academics. They're written for an academic background. They do require a level of academic understanding to read and understand them properly. I'm not gatekeeping. I'm just warning you before you go out and spend $50 a pop, because they are not cheap. They are not cheap. And I do not want you being the person whose Amazon review I read who says, I bought this book and it was really expensive and it did nothing for me. Okay, I kind of love reading those reviews at times because it's so funny when people have bought books that are well out of their ability to comprehend or fully understood what the book was about, and then they bitch about it and give it 1 star when it's a really good book. I don't want you doing that if what you are looking for is something more like the books at the beginning of this. If you're wanting a basic how to write, get the big yellow book. Okay? These, really useful, really interesting, but they take it into an academic space. Okay? So I would highly recommend them, but be aware of what they are. Okay, now we are starting to get things. Now we are starting to get things that are a little bit more technical. Definitely in the more technical thing. This one is the Cambridge Companion to Narrative Theory. Why did I not hold this up with the others? Because narrative theory is different to just looking at narrative. Narrative is the way that you tell a story. Narrative theory is the theoretical frameworks that you put around that telling. So I talk about narrative theory a bit in my book. I talk about the fact that, say, a film like Billy Elliot, the narrative is of a working class boy going to ballet lessons, challenging his ideas, the family to support him, and ultimately them coming out and supporting him, and him growing up and having a career as a ballet dancer, in formal dance. However, put in a lens of narrative theory over that, and you can read that film as in a Marxist manner of challenging the socioeconomic position of the majority of classically trained dancers, middle class versus working class, and the barriers put in the place of working class people to access areas like that. You can put it into the frame of gender, the narrative, use a gender narrative theory and look at it at the way that classical dance is challenging the gender norms of traditional masculinity within a working class family. Okay, that's where narrative theory comes in. There's also a whole load of other different ways that you can look at narrative. That's what a book like this is about. These are the sorts of things that start to come into play when you start running literary fiction, because you start thinking more about what themes am I building in, how do I want this viewed, what angle do I want people to sort of take to reading this. So it is an important consideration for literary fiction, not genre fiction. Okay? Now we're getting into stuff that is a lot more me and my particular interest centric. So this one is called Telling Histories, because I like to tell stories with a historical angle to them. This is looking at concepts around how we use history in fiction and how we use literary devices in writing history. Really fascinating book. Really. Again, it's not specifically talking about how to. It's something that you extrapolate through the essays that are within the book. Really interesting book, though. Now, the next one, I also am more of a postmodern writer. So, postmodernism. This one is postmodern fiction. This one's a pretty good primer. Gets you started. It's not the OG of postmodernism there. I'm going to get to the OG of postmodernism. But it's a nice, good book. Again, these books are not cheap, okay? Unless you really know what you're looking for, don't just go out and buy these on a whim, okay? I'm not I'm not creating a shopping list for you. I'm just giving you an idea of the sort of things that are out there, things that I would recommend if you were looking for this sort of thing. These are not cheap books, okay? Now, this one, Poetics of Postmodernism, History, Theory and Fiction by Linda Hutcheon. This is she's the big writer on postmodernism, okay? Another highly, highly, highly academic textbook. Like, so highly academic textbook, I cannot emphasize enough. You need a degree to read these. You read these within a degree. So they are relying on you having a degree within this to read these. But really, really useful. She is the OG of this stuff. And because I cannot be content with just general postmodernism, I take it one step further, and what I read, or what I write, is a thing called metafiction, which is fiction about fiction, or fiction that acknowledges its fictionality, which is what you will find if you read my novel, Poisoning the Nest, where I'm commenting on the fictionalizing of people's war experience by juxtaposing the first characters who are going through the First World War with the characters of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Okay? This one, again, Linda Hutchins, as I said, she's the OG. Narcissistic Narrative, the Metafiction Paradox. So there's that one. That's a really good one. That's like the big one. It has the chapter on histographic metafiction. So it's beyond just it's the way that history and metafiction come together. It's highly specialized. It's really specialized. So, and I think this is the most expensive book in this pile. That's how highly specialized this is. I have the last ones I have are two more on metafiction because I am that freak. You know. We have Patricia Waugh, Metafictions, and then we have Wench Ommensen, Metafictions. Okay, so is that everything? That is everything, Aloysius. Some of those sound really heavy. Yeah, some of these are really heavy. Some of these are books that I bought while I was doing my masters. Okay, so that big pile of stuff for the literary fiction, the Cambridge Companions, they're at the lighter end. As they start to get more specialised, it starts to become a me as a writer list. These may not be applicable at all to you as a writer. But I thought I'd like to share with you the kinds of books that are out there that might help you with your writing. Obviously, the beginning of the list is going to be the easy end of the list, or possibly the more functional end of the list. But did that help you, Aloysius? I think I'll go and nick your big yellow book. All right, you can borrow my big yellow book. Nick, no, you can't steal my big yellow book. I'll get it back from you when you're finished with it, okay? You can borrow my big yellow book. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed that, and we will be back again with some more writing advice. Anyway, bye-bye. De Volker Finger, ich bin ja Jesus. Bye-bye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.